Okay, I think it's noon, right? All right. I think we'll try to get started now. Okay? Good morning. Good morning. I can't say good morning anymore. It's high noon. All right, so hello to everybody who's here. Can I have your attention? Good morning, good afternoon. All right, good afternoon. All right, so welcome to everybody. We're so happy to have you here. We have a full house here, and as everybody knows, I think this is a simultaneous live presentation, and we're streaming live to an audience of more than 50 people, and they're coming from all over the place. We have somebody from Greece, and someone from Honolulu, and people from California, and Utah, and Nevada, and Texas, and of course, and Tennessee, and the tri-state area. So we're really excited to have the audience that we do today for our program, Patient Participation in Medical Research for Lupus. So let's get going. All right. Of course, we have to have the obligatory glitch. Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks, ma'am. Okay, so this is a hospital, so we're really focused on housekeeping. So in case anyone hasn't done this previously, can you turn your cell phones to vibrate or off? So that will be quiet, because you know we are recording as well as broadcasting. And we're going to have our panelists present first, followed by a Q&A period of about 20 minutes. So our virtual audience can type in their questions in the chat room online, and then our live audience, you have index cards at your places and pens. So if you would legibly write your questions out, our colleagues will collect them towards the end of the presentation, and then we will field those. So we're going to have our presentation first, followed by lunch at 1 o'clock. Okay? And virtual audience, you can be eating while you're listening. Okay, so disclosures are important to us. So HSS educational activities are carried out in a manner that serves the educational component of our mission. As faculty, we're committed to providing transparency in any relevant external relationships prior to giving an academic presentation. Dr. Kiru, to my immediate right, receives research support from AstraZeneca, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, and Lupus Therapeutics. Mary Ping, Priscilla Tyrell, and myself have no relevant disclosures to make. Okay, so what are we here to do today? So we got two things that we want to accomplish. One, we want to learn, and two, we want to celebrate. So hard part first, we're going to learn. Our patients often tell us that they're very interested in research, what goes on in research. So we want to lift the veil a little bit and talk about how is research developed? Who comes up with these ideas? How is it conducted? We want to give you a chance to ask your questions and have them answered. And we want to help you better evaluate if participation in research is right for you. And then we get to the celebration portion of the program. So this year we mark our 10 years as a Lupus and APS Center of Excellence, for which we're just thrilled. And later on, right before lunch, Dr. Jane Salmon, who's a senior scientist here and the director and founder of the Lupus Center of Excellence, will join us. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Okay, so a number of questions. So how is research conceived, designed, and conducted? What are the safeguards before we start and maybe even in the midst of all the research? Who can be included? Who should be excluded? And what are the patient benefits of participating? What process does a patient go through when they're participating in a research trial? We're also going to hear about the experience of one particular patient in a lupus research trial. What is important for patients to participate in research? Why? Why should patients participate? Who needs to be represented in medication trials, and who is not currently represented? By the way, I see people kind of craning. Feel free to turn your chairs, if it makes you more comfortable as you're looking at the slides. Okay, so modern medical research has wrought some miracles. Who here, and I do want to see a show of hands, who here knows anybody who's ever had smallpox? Okay, virtual audience, no one raised their hand, because no one has had smallpox, because medical research has essentially wiped out that disease, along with polio and many of the infections that have plagued us for millennia. So what's the frontier of lupus research today? Well, right now there are nearly 40 diverse compounds that are in the process of being studied in trials. And HSS is one of about 400 centers in Canada and the United States where clinical trials are being conducted. And we're part of the Lupus Clinical Investigators Network, sponsored by the Lupus Research Alliance. So we've got a number of things going on here. I've listed a URL there that you can research later, showing all the different trials and studies that are being undertaken. We've got 4 drug trials that are currently underway. We're not going to stay on the pie in the sky level. We're going to bring this down to cases, and we're going to talk about the Tulip trial, which is a drug trial that's currently going on. This drug was developed directly from research that was conducted here at Hospital for Special Surgery in the lab of Dr. Peggy Crow, who's currently our physician-in-chief. She's been here since the early 1980s, and she worked together with Dr. Kiru, who also advanced that research from bench into translation into a clinical trial. So what makes research advances possible? Besides the boatloads of money and the labs and the infrastructure, it's really the people that do it. From the scientists who conceive of what could be done to the physicians who take those bench findings and translate them into therapeutics that could work for patients, to the coordinators, the research coordinators that work directly with our patients when they're in trials. And of course, the most important thing is the patients who partner with us and try to push this needle forward. So our panelists today include Dr. Kyriakis Kiru. So he is a medical doctor and a doctor of science. He's a physician scientist. He focuses on lupus nephritis. His clinical care is for lupus patients, and his research practices have been with lupus. And we'd like to celebrate things next year. He's going to have a silver anniversary of being at HSS. So congratulations. Next to him is Mary Peng. Mary is Dr. Kiru's research coordinator, and as I said, she works directly with patients. She's involved in a number of different studies currently. And then we have next to Mary, Melissa Finney. I had the great pleasure of meeting Melissa a couple of weeks ago. I thought I was just going to nip in and say hello to her. We had a really lovely visit. She's enchanting. I know you'll enjoy the comments that she has to make to you today. And then finally, on the end, we have Priscilla Tyrell. Priscilla is a member of our social work programs department. She works out in the community with individuals and groups, and she's going to talk to us about who should be involved and why. I'm Margaret Smith. I'm the manager of the Lupus and APS Center of Excellence, and I'll be your moderator today. So let's begin. Dr. Kiru.
Thank you, Margaret, for organizing this for all of us. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Welcome, and also welcome the online audience as well. So, again, the purpose of this discussion today is to get you to know about why we do research in lupus and how is it done, and what is the benefit to all of us. So, as you already know, most of you, lupus or systemic lupus erythematosus SLE is a potentially serious disease that usually affects young women. And obviously that can have consequences for their lives, emotional, social, and professional lives. Over the last several decades, only one drug has been approved for lupus by the FDA, and that is belimumab. But as you know, we have other drugs that we use in lupus. Some of them are effective, such as steroids. Steroids include prednisone, methylprednisolone, and there are some other steroids as well. They work. They reduce inflammation and symptoms. However, they can get serious side effects, such as osteoporosis, the weakening of the bone, weight gain, high blood sugars, mood changes, insomnia, cataracts, and so on. There are many side effects that can happen here. We have other drugs as well. We have immunosuppressive drugs to suppress the immune system that is very active in lupus. And these include mycophenolate, methotrexate, azathioprine, cyclophosphamide, and hydroxychloroquine. So these are good drugs. We use them all the time, but they don't work for everybody all the time. They can also have severe side effects. So therefore, you understand that we really need new drugs that are safe and effective, and they will allow us to cut down on the prednisone, to even stop the prednisone. The types of research in lupus are mainly two in general lines. There are observational studies. They include registries and repositories. There, we collect clinical information on the patient. And we collect also blood samples and urine samples sometimes, and with the goal of understanding lupus, why it happens, why certain manifestations of lupus happen, like the kidney, for example, kidney disease, and so on. So these are important for us to lead us to new drugs eventually. And then we have the clinical interventional trials. This is what the focus of this meeting is today, is where introduce a new drug that we think is promising and study to see if it will work eventually. These are usually sponsored by two types of organizations, either the NIH, the National Institute of Health, or pharmaceutical companies. So here at HSS, we're one of several prestigious academic medical centers that do the research, and we're part of this network of centers, the LUCIN, the Lupus Clinical Investigators Network, and the Lupus Clinical Nephritis Trials Network. So we all work together with the purpose of getting drugs faster than before, getting advances in lupus care faster. So this shows you how research progresses through stages until it gets a new drug that will be approved by the FDA and be available in the market for use by everyone. We start in the lab. These are the preclinical research. So we find something interesting, we see how it works in cells, then we try it in animal models. So for example, mice that have something that looks like lupus disease. And then if we think that these appear to work and they are relatively safe, then we try them in humans. And that's the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. So limited number of patients receive the drug, and we see how is the drug behaving in the body of the patient. You know, what is the concentration after we do an injection? How much drug is there? We also check safety to see if it's safe. Do they develop any side effects? Anything to be concerned? And does it work? There are ways for us to tell if it works or not. And usually these studies are also performed in comparison with placebo. Placebo is not the real drug. It's something that looks like the drug, but it's not. We need this because we need to be unbiased. We need to have a way to really tell whether something works or not. So if that goes well, then the drug goes in phase 3 studies. These are the large trials, the large number of patients enrolled in the study. And this is just before approval by the FDA. So many patients are randomized now, which means they're randomly allocated. They're assigned to either the active drug or the placebo. And they're double-blinded, which means that both the investigators, the research team, and the patients, they're both blinded. They don't know what drug everybody gets. They may get the active or not. And then in the end, there will be comparison. They will analyze the data and see if really the drug made a difference. In that case, there will be an application to the FDA, and if it's approved, it will be available. Often, phase 3 studies are followed by extension studies. So the patients that completed the phase 3 study, they are given the option, and if they're eligible, they proceed to the extension study, where they get more drug for more time, for longer duration. And then that will allow us to see, you know, is it safe to take those drugs for longer time, like a few years, not just 1 year? And then are they still effective over 3 years, for example? These are often open label, and that means that everybody gets the drug. They know they get the drug at this point. So why is it so difficult to conduct research in lupus? There are certain problems. There are barriers with the patients, for example. Patients, like everybody else, are busy. They have their full, busy professional and social lives, obligations. Some of them are concerned about the safety. They are concerned, they know this is a new drug, how will it work for me? Will it cause side effects? Others are worried about getting the placebo and not the active drug. So they're saying, am I not going to get better because I'm going to be allocated to the placebo rather than the active drug? So those are some of the concerns. And some of this has to do with lack of awareness. So patients will not understand the whole issue about research. How is research done? So that's one of the purposes of, again, here, we are together to understand this better. And finally, a lack of access. So we are lucky to be in this big city. Many centers around the city are doing a lot of research about lupus, including us here at HSS. So what are the benefits? Why should somebody participate in research? Individually, the patient might get the benefit of getting a really new and effective drug that is relatively safe, and the clinical trials are very rigorous. They make sure they have the right patients. They make sure they give a drug that is really promising and progress through the stages to phase 3. So there is good promise that this drug will be finally effective. So they may get the benefit of that. Even more importantly, if we do the study successfully and we have another drug, now after belimumab in 2011, and that was after many decades, we're going to have another one and maybe another and another. There are currently many actually clinical trials in lupus with many interesting research investigation products that we think might work. So we may have new drugs and we will make it easier to treat lupus without so much steroids. So it will help everybody. And then finally, working as a team with the patient and the physician, then the team, the research team, when they work together, things are better. People come to their appointments, they take the drugs carefully, and this makes a difference. So is it safe? What should we be concerned about participating? Okay, so everything starts, the safety starts with an informed consent. We discuss the study with the patient in detail. The investigator and the research coordinator, they go over the study in a written and question and answer form, and we discuss the drug. What is it about? What does it do? What is the expectation? Are there any alternatives? Do we have to take the drug, or are there alternatives? Can you get something else that is standard of care right now? The next step after the informed consent, if it's signed and everybody agrees to participate, is the eligibility criteria, which means, is the patient okay to be included? Do they have really lupus, or do they have something else that looks like lupus? Do they have fibromyalgia? That's not a patient that should go in the study, because it won't give us good results. We may have false results. We may have a study that doesn't succeed because we had too many patients that shouldn't be in the study. So we really want to have the right patient that have real lupus, and we don't have often the studies will exclude something that is very severe and more rare. For example, CNS lupus. Somebody that got a stroke recently may not be eligible for the study unless there is a study for the stroke specifically. So most of the time at this point we're doing studies that either deal with joints, skin disease, kidney disease, and so on. So we want to exclude patients that might be at higher risk. For example, people who have infections, they will be excluded unless those are minor and treated well. Finally, when the study is continued, we have an independent body, a committee that does an oversight of the study. So this is the IRB, Institutional Review Board. So this is an independent body that is there to protect the rights and the welfare of the patients. It's composed of scientists, physicians that understand the research, other professionals, and even lay people that understand the needs of the patients. And finally, as you proceed in the study, there are ongoing safeguards. Rigorous protocols monitor the adverse events. If we have something like a pneumonia, for example, we will report it right away to the IRB and the sponsor of the study. This will happen within 24 hours. If there are too many side effects that happen in the first patients that are enrolled in the study, then the study will stop. There will be a stop of the study and no more. If everything continues, but one patient for some reason gets a side effect that is very serious, again, an infection perhaps, then we can take this patient out of the study and given treatment that is the best according to the judgment of the treating physician. If the lupus doesn't respond, for example, somebody, let's say, get a placebo, they don't get the active drug, they're not getting better, we can still take them off the study, say that they're called treatment failure, and then give them something else. They're still considered for the study, though. So they will, in the end of the study, it will be said that, okay, this was a patient, for example, that received placebo and didn't respond. So that will count positively towards the study, showing that the drug is effective. The patient will be okay, too, because it will be out of the study getting something that will work eventually for them. And for whatever reason, if the investigator feels or the patient feels that it's to their best interest to be out of the study, they can go out of the study anytime. So we're going to make this a little more clear by going through the Tulip 2 trial, which was done here at HSS. The name comes from the acronym Tulip, Treatment of Uncontrolled Lupus via the Interferon Pathway. It's a multi-center, multiple centers across the US and the world actually participate. It's a randomized, double-blind, as we discussed, placebo-controlled study, phase 3. It's before the approval now. There were plans to recruit 360 patients, randomly assigned to the active infusion or the placebo, every 4 weeks for 1 year. After the end of the trial, eligible patients could enroll in the long-term extension study that goes for 3 years. And Melissa actually is in the extension study now. And the treatment drug is anifrolumab. Let me explain about this real quick. Before I tell you about anifrolumab, I'm going to tell you about interferon. So interferons, type 1 interferons, are a group of proteins that in our body fight viral infections. That's where they're usually produced for. How they work, they bind to a receptor, interferon receptor 1, on the cell membrane of a cell, and then this binding, these are the interferons. They bind here and they activate the cell. And that does what it's supposed to do. In lupus, unfortunately, interferons are high. They're not supposed to be there. There's no viral infections to make them happen. So that's part of the study that Margaret was talking about. We did here at HSS in Dr. Crow's lab. We and others found that interferon is high in lupus and is associated with disease activity, high disease activity. So now a pharmaceutical company, AstraZeneca, designed this drug, anifrolumab, which is really a monoclonal antibody. It's a humanized, it doesn't look like foreign to the body, so it doesn't cause allergic reactions. It's designed to specifically bind to this receptor. So it binds here, and it doesn't allow the interferons to do their thing. So that's how we think this is working and will help lupus. And with that, I would like to give the stage to Mary Peng, our research coordinator. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Dr. Kier mentioned, I'm a research coordinator, so that basically means my main role is to help identify and recruit patients who might be eligible for a clinical trial, and also to coordinate and manage each of the research visits. So today I will talk to you about the experience and expectations for a patient enrolled in a clinical trial. So again, I will be using a study that we participated in at HSS as an example to guide you through this presentation. So as Dr. Kier mentioned earlier, we participated in the Tulip study, specifically the second phase 3 trial. Again, Tulip stands for the treatment of uncontrolled lupus via the interferon pathway. The main medication that they were studying is called anifrolumab, which is given through an IV infusion once every 4 weeks. The primary endpoint or objective of the study was to evaluate the effect of anifrolumab on reducing lupus disease activity. It is a 1-year-long study, and their goal was to enroll 360 patients, but they actually enrolled 373. The main population that they wanted to study this in was 18 to 70-year-olds who had moderate to severe lupus and who were on standard of care lupus medications like hydroxychloroquine and prednisone. So who is involved in a clinical trial? There are 3 main entities. First, there's the sponsor. They are an organization or company that agrees to initiate and or fund a clinical trial. So in the case of the Tulip study, that was AstraZeneca Pharmaceutical Company. They partner with an institutional review board, or an IRB. Again, the IRB oversees all biomedical research involving human participants. Their primary responsibility is to protect the rights and welfare of research participants. For the Tulip trial, the IRB that they used was Copernicus Group IRB, or CGIRB. And then we have the study sites. So these are places where the study medication is being tested in research participants. The sponsor will then send the data collected at the study sites to the FDA or Food and Drug Administration for approval. HSS was one of 113 sites that participated worldwide in the Tulip 2 trial. And then at the beginning of a study, the study site will try to identify eligible patients. So for example, as a research coordinator at HSS, I review patient charts regularly and I coordinate with the HSS rheumatologists and staff to identify patients who might be eligible for a trial. If you are considered a potential candidate, you will then schedule a research visit with the doctor or principal investigator of the research study to screen for your eligibility. This visit is important for determining if you meet the study's set of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So you will review with the doctor your medical history, your current medications, and your symptoms. You will also get blood work done. Most importantly, at this visit, you will review and sign the study's consent form. The goal of signing the consent form is to thoroughly inform you about the research study. So you will review the purpose and requirements, discuss the risks and benefits to participating, and also discuss alternatives to participating, like continuing with existing treatments or continuing on standard of care lupus medications. All medical information and data collected will remain private and confidential. So what that means is your information is kept anonymous and you are assigned a specific study code and no personal identifiers like your name and date of birth are given. The scientists doing the research will not know your identity. After the screening visit, the study sponsor, so in the case of Tulip, that would be AstraZeneca, will review your eligibility within the following month. If you are considered eligible, you will be randomized to receive either the treatment arm, so that would be anifrolumab, or the control arm or placebo of the study. Treatment is considered double-blind. So what that means is the study doctor and team are unaware of what treatment you are assigned to, and you, the patient, are unaware what treatment you will receive. This is to minimize potential bias. So sometimes when patients take something new, they might automatically think that it's working. By keeping patients blinded to the treatment they receive, researchers will be able to objectively determine if they are responding to either the medication or the placebo. In terms of research visits, you're expected to come to a research visit on a regular basis for safety monitoring, disease assessment, and to receive the study medication. In the case of Tulip, research visits are about once a month. Your visits will usually consist of a physical exam by the doctor, a review of your symptoms and medications, and patient survey questions. So the survey questions will be given to you either in the form of handwritten forms or sometimes through electronically through a tablet. And then there will be physician assessments for your doctor to complete, and this is for your doctors to see how your lupus is progressing throughout the course of you being in the study. Your doctor will also ask to collect blood work from you after each research visit. This is one way for doctors to determine if there are improvements in your lupus while you are in the study. Depending on the study, the way your medication is administered can vary. It can be through an IV infusion, it can be given to you through an oral capsule or pill, and it can also be given to you through a subcutaneous injection or a shot. In the case of Tulip, the anifrolumab or placebo medication is given through an IV infusion once a month for about 30 minutes. If you were a research patient at HSS, the nurses would monitor your vital signs for about 1 to 2 hours after your infusion, and this is to make sure that you are tolerating the medication. In terms of study costs, all study-related procedures and research visits are covered by the research study. Any incentives, such as travel reimbursements, will depend on the study and its budget. In general, you will not incur a direct cost related to being in the study. In terms of your safety, the doctor and study team will monitor your safety at each research visit. If your safety is ever a concern, the doctor may consider withdrawing you from the study and/or putting you on alternative treatments. Throughout the course of being in the trial, you should report any undesirable side effects or symptoms that you're experiencing. After you receive your last dose of study medication at the end of a clinical trial, you will usually attend 1 to 2 more follow-up doctor visits for safety assessment. These follow-up visits are important for making sure that you are tolerating being off the medication. So what happens afterwards? If a study meets its predetermined primary endpoint or objective, then it is considered a success. The Food and Drug Administration will then review the study's data and consider the medication for approval. For Tulip, the anifrolumab medication is currently under FDA review. The entire process of FDA review may take anywhere from a few months to up to 2.5 years. I would now like to introduce you to Melissa Finney, who participated in the Tulip 2 trial 2 years ago. For the last year, she has also been participating in the long-term extension of the Tulip trial, which is 3 years long in duration. She will share with you today her perspective on being a clinical trial participant. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Oh, I love Black women. I always respond back to you. Good afternoon. Just a little bit about myself. My name is Melissa Finney. I'm from Philadelphia originally. I went to school in Los Angeles. Shout out to Callie on the phone. And I have been a Harlem resident for the last 20 years. Hearing this was really difficult for me in a way that was very surprising because it made me remember being really sick. And I haven't remembered in so long because I'm well now. I'm wearing heels. That was like a complete impossibility less than a year ago. So when I was 36 years old, I was engaged to be married. And I woke up in the middle of the night and started violently throwing up. And me and my husband, soon-to-be husband, thought, oh, great, I'm pregnant. And I went to the doctor, and he said, you're not pregnant. You probably have a virus. Take a leave. Go live your life. And the next week, I couldn't walk. And I went to Philadelphia. My sister-in-law is an infectious disease doctor, and it was a big family meal. I was passing some food, and she said, what's wrong with you? And I thought she just meant that I was down and wasn't feeling great, but she was looking at my hands, and my hands were swollen like baseball mitts. And I said, I don't know. The doctor says I have a virus. And she said quite a few things, but she said, my favorite thing, actually, I'm going to repeat what she said. My favorite thing that she said is that 40,000 people graduate from medical school every year. You think all of them are geniuses? Ooh, love that. Thank God for her. Anyway, and so she said, tomorrow I want you tested for Lyme disease and for lupus. And so my sister-in-law was the one who ended up diagnosing me. So as many of you know in the room, there's not an exact test for lupus. So it was a lengthy process, not as lengthy though as I read it has been for many who took years, so I'm very grateful. And then when I was diagnosed, I thought, awesome, take care of that. And then, great, give me whatever pill you got and I'll take that. And I remember going home and telling my husband, and he just was like, I married a 6'4", humongous Black man that has issues with emotion, and he was completely crestfallen. And I didn't understand why, and it was because his 2 best friends' mothers had died from lupus. And so he knew exactly what I was in store for. So I got on prednisone, and I got on hydrochloroquine, and I went to a massage therapist, and an acupuncturist, and my rheumatologist, and a neurologist, because I started getting these electric shocks that made people think that I had Tourette's because I kept jumping, and I work in sales, so being with clients was like a horrible, horrible thing. And I took charcoal pills, I got colonics. There is not one thing. I took glutamine, I ate more spinach, all of the dumb things that people tell you on the street that you should do because they knew their second cousin 3 times removed had lupus and this worked for them. I did that. And I was desperate. And it got to the point that like mobility was really difficult. I was in pain all of the time. I was very lucky that I didn't have the visible rash, but then of course people said, but you don't look sick. And I was really, really nervous at work that they thought I was faking it because I was in pain so much when really I was just faking being well every single day. And anyway, I gave the very best of myself to my work. And then when I got home, I would collapse and my husband would bathe me. My job is based abroad, and so I had to travel abroad, but there's no way I could travel. And it wasn't until then that I told them that I had lupus, which I, of course, had to explain to them because they had never heard it. I work in the music industry. Thank God for Selena Gomez, who had come out, and she had said, and that really helps explain what it was. Within a week, I was in the office, and I felt something was not right. I went to the ladies' room, and I had a stroke. And I bring this up because the stroke was the best thing in the world because at that point I had been diagnosed with minor lupus, even though it felt so major to me. And me being from minor to minor, meaning that no major organ was affected by my lupus, me moving from minor to moderate or whatever the hell they told me that was then made it possible for me to be in a study. And that study is why I'm standing here in heels today. Okay. I enrolled in the study because I would have done anything. I would have taken whatever precaution or any, of course you have tissues. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I would have done anything. And it wasn't until I was talking to Margaret 2 years into the study that it even occurred to me that I should think twice for the study. As a black woman, we definitely have a history that should make us suspicious of the medical community. And I was so desperate that that didn't even creep into my thought process. And I just think what a privilege it is that I was able to go through this entire experience and it never crossed my mind, ever. I mean, there was a point in time when I started going to the doctor that every doctor's appointment was so horrible that I remember going to the gynecologist and them telling me that if I got pregnant, there was a 30% chance that I would be deciding between my child's life and mine. And that was the last doctor's visit I've ever been to, by myself. My father started coming to all of my doctor's appointments. He's very familiar with Dr. Kiru and Mary. And I say that because it was only with my father, who wears a suit to every single appointment, that I thought about being a black woman, because he was like, they treat us differently. And so because I was going to be in sweatpants, he wore a suit to every single doctor's appointment. Excuse me. Oh, thank you. So we can make those work? Thank you. Okay, so let's talk about the study. I just wanted to give you some perspective on where I was. My God, it feels like a lifetime ago, but it was very difficult. And so this study, the hurdles of the study, I am terrified of needles, terrified. And so it's very helpful to have someone hold my hand. I do remember though, when you think you've been to the doctor before you get sick, you have no idea what it's like to go to the doctor. And also it's quite terrifying. Also because I started going into rooms where everyone was really sick as opposed to waiting for a pap smear. And that was really difficult. I remember getting 22 vials of blood taken, and I had done it. I was busy and going to work, and so I was like, I'll do it at Quest. And so I went to Quest diagnostics in Harlem on 125th Street, and they didn't even have a private room. And so I had to I've never had more than like 3 vials of blood taken, and so to have 22 out in front of everyone, I started crying, which you see is very easy for me, right? And I remember this older gentleman stranger just coming up and holding my hand while I was getting that blood work done. So that was very scary for me. I have to say, though, that throughout the entire thing, Dr. Kiru and Mary made me and my father feel very comfortable and very well taken care of. I, once again, thought as soon as I took this infusion that I would be back in heels and back in my life and back with everything, and that is not at all what occurred. I mean, it probably took me, I definitely thought I wasn't getting the drug, and obviously still it's double-blinded, but for 6 months I felt the same. But this time, though, I felt incredibly depressed because I felt like I had exercised all of my options. And so then on top of my lupus drugs, I definitely had to add some antidepressants just to get through the day and all of those things. I want to highlight one other thing, and how am I on time? We're getting to the end? No problem. I just want to highlight one other thing, which was the Lupus Line. So I'm very grateful to HSS for having the Lupus Line. I'm no stranger to therapy, and frankly, when someone offered me yet another therapist, I was like, I'm good. But this particular person had lupus, and so for the first time, I would tell them about something that happened, and they would say, me too, and that was life-changing for me. I think that I'm very grateful to have had this experience, especially I still follow people with lupus on Instagram, and I am very clear that I am so lucky. So I'm lucky to have been part of the study. I'm lucky to be feeling better, placebo, no placebo, whatever. And I'm very, very, very lucky that I had the chance to do this without any thought of my own personal security or safety. So, okay.
Okay, we will hear from Priscilla. Bring us on home, Priscilla.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Margaret, but thank you, Melissa, for openly sharing your story and for your valuable perspective. So as Margaret said, I'm Priscilla Tyrell. I'm a clinical social worker here at HSS, and I'm honored to present this talk on behalf of Jillian Rose, our Director of Community Engagement, Diversity, and Research, who was unable to be here today, but wanted to ensure that this important perspective is part of this conversation. Lupus disproportionately affects minority groups such as African Americans, Latinos, and Asians, and these populations often experience higher symptom severity, more lupus-related complications, and higher mortality rates, in addition to other disparities such as lack of appropriate care, transportation barriers, and lower socioeconomic status. And of note, some of these studies even suggest that minority populations may have different genetic components that impact disease development and disease progression. Now, the goal of clinical trials is to discover new and better treatments for disease. And currently, there are 100,000 ongoing clinical trials in the United States, and minority participation is low. African Americans represent 12% of the United States population, but only 5% of clinical trial participants. And Latinos represent 16% of the U.S. population, with only 1% of clinical trial participants. And as Margaret mentioned earlier, there are over 400 clinical trial sites in the United States and Canada. However, these sites have had limited success with recruiting minority patients. So for example, in 2011, Benlysta became the first drug in over 50 years specifically approved to treat lupus. And although the study was successful in recruiting white patients, only 14% of African Americans and 20% of Latino patients participated in the trials despite the prevalence of lupus among these groups. Now, the small sample size of these groups made it challenging for clinicians to understand if prescribing Benlysta would be beneficial for these specific populations. In a trial called the Embrace study, specifically looking at African American patients and other patients of Black race was warranted to study the efficacy of Benlysta, and it was completed in 2019. 508 patients of African ancestry have participated. Now, this study called for more information that was available to clinicians to help them in deciding whether Benlysta was beneficial for these specific populations. We also wanted to share and include some pie charts just as a visual representation of the imbalance of the prevalence of lupus versus participation in clinical trials. So the people who seem to be most impacted, most affected by this condition are often not represented in the clinical studies to find a drug to assist with treatment. This is why it's especially important to have a multicultural or diverse cohort of patients represented in clinical trials. So as we've been hearing today, there are some real patient barriers to participation. Dr. Kiro went over some of these barriers. However, some of the barriers that we consistently hear from minority patients is the lack of awareness of clinical trials. So our patients have shared with us that they've never heard of a clinical trial before, or they have not been invited to participate in a trial. So sometimes we think we may be doing a good job at recruitment, but we may not be asking everyone. And so oftentimes patients are not referred to clinical trials appropriately or may not even know from their treating clinicians. There may be cost concerns that may deter patients from participating, such as not being able to afford transportation for what seems like an additional appointment in their day, childcare concerns, or even costs associated with meals if you have to be out of your home for several hours can be a burden. So these factors may further cause patients from not wanting to participate in trials. Lack of bilingual staff or materials that may not be available to patients in their native language can also be challenging, and some patients may have difficulty with reading. So it's important to especially pay attention to health literacy cues. Mistrust or lack of trust in general due to a history of human rights violation, especially in minority communities, is often a barrier. And Melissa, you began talking about that, so thank you. Fear of the negative impact on quality of life for patients is another real barrier. Some patients may say, I'm doing well, why am I going to participate in Rock the Boat? Other patients may feel that they're ineligible because they're too sick, and there's no guarantee that the treatment may improve their specific health or overall health outcomes. So here at HSS, our Lupus Center is very focused on collaborating with our patients to engage them in clinical trials. And we want to invite patients to partner with us. And as we heard from Melissa, being able to feel as if you're a valued resource of the study team, along with the clinician and the principal investigator, is really important for clinical trial engagement and participation. As a patient, we want you to ask questions. We want you to be as informed as you can so you can participate in a process that we call shared decision making. We want you to have all the information that you need to address the questions and concerns, but most importantly, we want to hear what you don't understand and what are your concerns about the study process or what will occur. Your safety and your rights are of our utmost concern. So it's important for us to acknowledge historical rights violations and safety issues. And oftentimes we may shy away from what has happened in history, whether it's related to the Tuskegee studies or sterilization studies of Latino females. However, it's important for you to bring these questions, these concerns into the room and acknowledge that, yes, these things have happened. We want to ensure that we have a conversation together about your thoughts and your feelings around these issues. This way we can begin a dialogue around where we can educate you about our commitment, but most importantly, our practice. We also want to discuss your fears and concerns of feeling like a guinea pig or being experimented on. And as Dr. Kiru mentioned, lupus is a really challenging condition to manage. And it's important for patients to feel part of a team where they can feel comfortable exploring the unknown, but in a way that feels safe, in a way that has integrity, and a way that makes you feel comfortable and at ease. And please let us know if our tools and materials are not clear or they're not patient-friendly. It's important for you to understand all of our consent forms that are handed to you, and that the tools use simple language that break down complex or technical terms that can often be confusing. And we encourage you to bring in family members because we know that they are your support system. We know that they help you to make important decisions. And it's okay to bring a loved one, a partner, an uncle, whoever you identify as your support person, because we want to be inclusive of them as you seek to make the most important decisions for yourself. We also want to learn about what other barriers may prevent you from future participation, whether it be financial, transportation, childcare. In a partnership, it's important to talk about how to make your participation possible, and by openly communicating potential barriers, your thoughts and concerns, our study team will be better equipped to provide solutions and resources to better facilitate your participation. So as we conclude, we need each other. Our lupus patients are truly critical in the success of clinical trials and to help us advance lupus treatment and interventions. Participation of diverse patients in clinical trials is also essential to reduce lupus health disparities at the individual and systems levels and to help us discover the efficacy, side effects, and risk of medications to help patients make better treatment decisions. We need representation in clinical studies from those that are most impacted by lupus to discover more appropriate and effective treatment options specifically tailored for you. So thank you all for being here today.
Okay, so we've come to the point where we're going to throw it out to you. So everybody, I believe, should have an index card at their place and pens. So if you haven't already, if you have any questions, would you please write them legibly on the cards, and our colleagues will pick them up. And we have here in our audience today some other of our research coordinators. I just want to introduce them to you. So Sophia Liu, Bessie Stam, Dina Shira, and Joanne Vega, and they all assist researchers and doctors in path on discovery here. So I also invite our webinar audience, if they are in the chat room, they can start typing their questions and we'll pick them up, okay? You can pass your cards or just indicate if you have a question. Okay, this is probably a question for Dr. Kiru, I'm sure. Okay, so the question is, I heard that leaky gut syndrome can lead to lupus. Have you heard of this? Yes. Okay, so we've got our yeah, you can use your microphone there. Is it on? Make sure it's on. There you go. There you go.
Yes. So this week, I think you're referring to protein-losing enteropathy, which means that there's a lot of fluid that is not absorbed in the gut, and then it can cause diarrhea and malnutrition and hydration and all of that. And that's sometimes, it's a rare form of lupus. Sometimes we see that with lupus. It's a more serious manifestation of lupus. Not very common, rare.
Other questions? Do we have cards here? Okay, sure. Okay, we have a question from our audience. Why is donated blood not routinely screened for the presence of anti-immune markers? And the commenters, I have no family history of an autoimmune disease. So why is blood not regularly screened? Or is it?
So I guess the question is really, is it safe to receive blood from somebody who has lupus, somebody who doesn't? And yeah, there's no reason, there's no infection there. So we usually screen for infections. These are live bacteria or whatever that can grow in the new body. But the autoantibodies, those are not a problem. There's no issue with getting transfusion from somebody with lupus.
Okay, do we have other questions? So I guess, a little bit of elucidation about treatment for lupus and studies. So any further studies, I guess, that are being carried out? Other drugs, yeah.
So there are many, over 20 maybe, drugs that have been evaluated and are still under evaluation for lupus. So there are drugs that look like belimumab or Benlysta, that they do similar things to what it does. And some of them failed to proceed to the next phase, so they're not approved. And that's because lupus is a complicated disease. It's difficult to make sure that somebody improves, right? Because they can have a skin rash that gets better, and then they have some joint pains that come up, and it's hard to put all this together. You know, the skin, the joints, and then make sure that everything is in the right direction or not. And so actually the belimumab study, the Benlysta, they had to do some analysis that excluded eventually patients that had fibromyalgia or patients that looked like lupus, but they weren't really lupus. They had ANA tests, but they were not the real patients that we know. And when these were excluded, then the study succeeded and was proved to be helpful. So there are other molecules. So they have studies about rituximab, which some of you may have heard. That's another treatment there. It's not proven to work. We think it's working, but again, all of these issues with being able to prove something in lupus is difficult. There are other studies like cytokine related, so like the one for Tulip. There is one study that we have already started to recruit patients for. That's about a medication called Ustekinumab or Stelara. It's used for psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, or Crohn's disease, and we think it might work for lupus. So this is a drug that is already approved by the FDA, and it will be easier perhaps to get approval for lupus if it works. So we're doing that study right now.
Great, thank you.
And there are many, many other molecules that are actually explored.
Thank you. So I think this one is for Priscilla. So how are we tracking and or continuing to engage patient contacts in the underrepresented minority communities?
Thank you. That's a really wonderful question. So conferences and seminars like this is extremely important. So our hospital, and there are many different ways. So part of it is physician education, which working really closely. The study team is down in the clinic during appointments, being able to educate patients about what's happening. Oftentimes our support and education programs also invite many researchers to come in and share about the various studies that are happening. As Margaret said, hosting this event, it was also to bring awareness to this very important issue. But honestly, it's really beginning a dialogue. If you have questions or you know those who may be considering a clinical trial, to please bring that question to the medical visit, whether it be the physician, a social worker, and we can really connect you to the appropriate resources.
Great. So here's the next one. We have many questions. Does it matter if you have more than one autoimmune disease, for example, lupus and RA and Sjogren's, in order to participate?
Sometimes this is a problem because, the most example, I guess, that tells the problem is, for example, asthma. Somebody has asthma and lupus, and they take steroids for asthma, and then the lupus is better. So it's hard to tell whether the drug works or it's the steroid. So we don't want to deal with too many autoimmune diseases because it gets confusing. So usually they exclude patients that have rheumatoid and lupus at the same time, or scleroderma and lupus at the same time. These people exist, and they will benefit, obviously, if the study proves the drug to work. Eventually, after it's approved, they may get the benefit of the drug, obviously, but not during the study time, because we want to be sure that something works for what we're looking for.
All right. So here's a question for two people have kind of a similar question. So how does participation in a study impact your current lupus protocol, your drugs, and would you have to go off all your drugs that suppress your autoimmune activity to be involved in a study?
Okay. So in response to the second question, which was...
So would you have to go off all your drugs?
So for these trials, they often will recruit patients who are already on standard of care lupus medications. They don't want to force you to not be on any lupus medication. So because some patients will be receiving the placebo, it's for their own safety that you are also... these trials are looking to see if adding another treatment on top of your standard of care lupus medications will be of benefit.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't want to take the medication out, so that's not ethical to take you off your medications and then have a flare of lupus. That's not the way to do it. But we want to see if something in addition to your medicine makes it better, because you're coming to the study already on some medicines that don't work that well. So that's the idea.
Okay. All right, so here's another. If you're on Benlysta infusion, should or can you still try this new research study medication?
So we usually don't like that, especially if it's very recent. If somebody who is on Benlysta within 3 months from the time that they are supposed to start the new drug. It's confusing again. It's another drug that may work for a longer time, and therefore we cannot know whether the new drug works or is it the Benlysta that works. So that therefore we don't do that. Also for rituximab, if somebody receives rituximab within a year, they may not be eligible. They have to wait for a year before they can get into the study.
All right. So are we aware of why women tend to be more diagnosed with lupus than men? That's the million-dollar question.
So the short answer is we don't know, but there are definitely factors. So there are genetic factors. So certain genes that women have and men will not have. There are also hormones. Estrogens may make somebody flare, for example, with lupus. So there are very, very, I guess, different reasons why this could be, and we don't know all of them.
Okay. What type of diet should be followed? What are the best kinds of foods to eat?
So there are no magic diets that somebody should do, but for lupus people usually, they should eat a healthy diet, obviously, hydrate themselves, and we want to be sure they get enough calcium if they're on steroids because they may get osteoporosis, so that's important. And then there are certain foods that may be a problem. For example, alfalfa may not be good for you, may cause a flare. So some people avoid gluten. It's not proven that gluten makes it worse, but some people say it's better when they're off gluten. So these are things that we don't know for sure, but some patients do anyway, and some of them feel better.
Okay. So we have a question from Kiana, who's writing to us from virtual land. So she's following up on the leaky gut question. It was a bit muffled, I guess. So she said there's a lot of chat about it being an issue with autoimmune, about leaky gut being an issue with autoimmune diseases. Are there trials looking into leaky gut for lupus patients?
So I guess this might mean perhaps that I'm trying to understand exactly the point, but one point of leaky gut might mean that there are bacteria that go through the gut and trigger the system, the immune system, to cause autoimmunity. So that's the microbiome, the collection of bacteria in the gut that may trigger disease. And so this is something that is studied preclinically at this point. It's not a clinical trial, but people are studying the microbiome of patients with lupus.
Okay. And we're going to take a last question now, and this I'll also take from our virtual audience. So Catherine writes, can a woman with SLE planning pregnancy participate in a research study?
Yeah, the short answer is no, because we don't know whether the medication will be safe for pregnancy. So for the usual studies, the new drugs that are being developed, the answer is no.
Okay.
Can I answer that
Please,
as
yes.
well? I forgot to mention that as a hurdle of this study, but also if you get pregnant, you will be asked to leave the study. So it's just something to consider, but your life is worth whatever it takes, and your kids need you to actually be there. So
Yeah, very true. Well, I think this brings us to the conclusion of the webinar portion, but the last question falls very, very happily, I would say, because I would like to bring forth Dr. Jane Salmon, who, yes, you can stand, just stand by that food, please. So we're going to raise the screen. Dr. Salmon, as I mentioned to you, is a senior scientist here. She's been here since, am I allowed to say how long you've been here? Very long. She's venerable. She's an institution. So she's been here since the early 1980s. She's a scientific officer. She's on the faculty of Weill Cornell Medical College. She's a full professor there. She has an appointment here at HSS. She founded the Lupus and APS Center of Excellence. She leads it. She is a tremendous researcher. I mean, if we talk pregnancy, her research has been groundbreaking, allowing women who never could have hoped to be pregnant, to carry babies to full term. And she just became a grandmother for the third time on Friday. So I asked Dr. Salmon to say a few words to us.
Well, the first thing I want to do is thank all of you for coming and to thank the speakers for really being spectacular. I think what they underscore is the whole point of the center. The center is about partnering between physicians, patients, coordinators, social workers, nurses, and students. And the center really was founded 10 years ago, so I don't know if you all know that today is the 10-year birthday party for the center. So we've been studying lupus here at HSS for more than 50 years. And I think our studies have led to quite important discoveries, but all of you are here, so the discoveries aren't adequate. We really have to be doing better. And I think what's important to recognize, what all of you should think about, is how you can help us be better. And one of the ways you can help us be better is thinking about being in trials. Trials, we need drugs for all patients. So all patients have to be in trials so we can see if they work the same way for everybody. So part of our goal today was to explain to you, to demystify, to talk about the safety and the importance of the partnership. I just want to read to you the mission, since we're celebrating the birthday, of the Lupus and APS Center of Excellence. You understand what our goal is and what we're working towards. So our mission is to provide individualized state-of-the-art care, support, and education to patients with lupus and APS, and to advance understanding of the causes of lupus and APS, and to develop novel treatments that improve patients' lives. So that was our mission, is our mission still, when we were founded 10 years ago. And what I hope today at the celebration of our birthday is that the presentation increased your understanding of lupus research and will allow you to consider being in a lupus trial. Because as all of the speakers mentioned, it's about partnership, and we have to work together and share. We are here to answer questions. We are here to create trust. We are here to diffuse mistrust, because we all want to make lupus go away. And that's really our ultimate goal.
Here, here.
I have to thank Margaret, who hasn't been here as long as I have. She's relatively new, a year and
9 months. 9 months.
Anyway, she's just been fantastic in communicating, in connecting, and in spreading our mission and touching all kinds of patients from everywhere, virtual as well as local. So I thank her for organizing all of this today.
Thank you. Thank you.